Welcome to the Amplified Podcast Reloaded. Groundwork, Ohio is a committed, nonpartisan public policy, research, and advocacy organization where we focus on the time when children's experiences and environments most influence their health development and life trajectory from birth to age 5. Our vision? That Ohio is the best place to be a young child, and every child has the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Up for the extra project, the evening event, the reception. Can you take on something with an imminent deadline?
Can you speak to the types of investments maybe you've seen be the most effective in strengthening both family stability and economic growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's still a lot to learn in this space. But part of the reason I moved my academic home from economics to women's studies is because I think that systemic change is really essential, and we need to do the hard work of looking at what we value and what our economic systems value currently, and just thinking about it from a purely sort of economic perspective, I think misses the boat on a lot of things. So, for example, just thinking about the nature of work, right? So I think that flexible work options have been really helpful for strengthening family stability and economic growth. They allow people to engage in caregiving and have more meaningful kind of time and relationships with their families, right? Without having to worry about work obligations as much. But I think we need to go further than that, right? To normalize not just a flexible work schedule or some remote work time, right? But thinking about what does it mean that we've normalized work to occupy so much of our time? We need to do that, right? And could we, for example, in other countries, right, with a 4-day work week, right, what would that look like? And how could we make that work? So I think we just need to have a different or revise the way we approach work and what that means, and also acknowledge that caregiving is work and should be counted as such and compensated as such. So I think that's one is thinking about flexible work, but also how we define work. I think paid family leave is another one that can be really helpful.
Absolutely.
And so I'm excited to see a bill for that being introduced in Ohio, and I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yes, I was going to mention Ohio Senate Bill 396 would establish a state-level family and medical leave insurance benefit. Dr. Chen, how does access to paid family leave impact women's ability to remain in and re-enter the workforce? And what are the broader consequences when that support is missing?
Yeah, I think this is so important because these pivotal moments, right, of either having a child, adopting a child, or some other kind of health crisis, perhaps, where you need to provide caregiving, those are the moments where we see a lot of detachment from the workforce, right? It becomes overwhelming. And without that access to paid family leave, people decide to leave their jobs, right, with the hopes of perhaps rejoining in the future, or perhaps with the knowledge that they're never going to rejoin the workforce, right? And so, having the job protection is helpful, of course, but we really need to make it paid so that it's accessible by all employees and doesn't effectively become just a benefit for higher income and wealthy folks.
Absolutely.
And again, it's to acknowledge the importance of caregiving in all of our lives. It's really interesting too, right? In terms of economics, we think about building the inputs that we need for a functional economy, right? Which canonically are sort of capital and labor, right? And so we have all these tax incentives and different programs to encourage investment in capital and capital building. We have very few of those to encourage investment in labor and skill building. Think of workers, or oftentimes economists, right, imagine workers as appearing on the doorstep of a business fully formed.
That's right.
Without any context or any consideration as to how all those skills are acquired and who's spending the time and putting in the effort to effectively build that worker, right? And so I think that's been a big miss in both economic theory and public policy is this mistaken sort of belief that, I think implicitly too, there's also this sort of belief that childcare is unskilled labor, right? And can sort of keep kids alive for however many hours.
Absolutely.
And that is not at all what childcare is, right? There is some component of that. But what we're looking for, what we want to provide as parents, right, is enrichment and engagement and so many other things that actually require lots of skills, right? Another thing I've seen is that I think that a lot of businesses gloss over the cost of worker attrition, losing workers. Amazon is a great example in their warehouses, right? They have over 100% turnover. They're literally replacing their entire workforce almost every few months. And I don't think that they include the costs of the rehiring, and family leave speaks to that as well, because the cost of losing an employee, right, due to the need for caregiving, is ultimately a huge cost to your organization in the time that it takes to do another search, to hire someone, to retrain them, get them up to speed, right? Get them onboarded. All of those things are a huge loss, right? That
Right.
you're paying that worker.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. Chen. Are there any other gems you would like to share while we are in this conversation?
Well, one thing that popped into my head was thinking about the longer term economic consequences when women aren't able to fully participate in the labor market is also this potential loss of innovation, right? There's so many women who have amazing ideas, right? And brilliant thoughts, right? That they're unable to spend time nurturing and developing. And so that's also a loss that we should consider with our policies that are effectively excluding half of the population from being able to fully engage in the labor market.
I know that we've covered a lot of ground in terms of just how households and women led households are making very challenging decisions around childcare and other decisions regarding their family each and every day. How do challenges like childcare costs and wage gaps compound over time for women when we think about long-term economic mobility?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think some of the challenges also in a kind of a life cycle perspective, right? You're going to be kind of peak, years to grow your family where your childcare costs are at the highest, but where for a lot of career trajectories, that's also the same time that you need to invest the most in your upwards mobility. And so to the extent that we can separate those things, right, or create some space between those, I think would be really helpful, because that is where we see a lot of the drop off for women, right? And a lot of the studies show that coming straight out of or in their first few jobs in their careers, men and women are actually pretty much at par. And so really start to emerge in the 30s and 40s as women leave for caregiving reasons, right? And so that just, yes, that obviously is going to continue to compound over time. And here I think ageism is another really important element, right? For women, it's very hard to have a career interruption and return, right? Employers still are oftentimes very skeptical of those gaps on resumes and are unwilling to read time spent in caregiving as time also spent developing skills that are important in a workplace setting, right? That, also include strategic planning, financial planning, right? Event planning, all sorts of things. And so even just being open to, I think I would love to see employers being more open to hiring older folks, right, who have non-traditional sort of work histories, who have interruptions for caregiving, and not letting that ageism creep in, right? I feel like a lot of folks just feel like, oh, I'd rather take the risk on the 25-year-old than a
Right.
45-year-old. So that is also makes it very hard, of course, for caregivers to re-enter the labor market.
That's so true. And you brought up a great demographic point in terms of age, how do these challenges show up differently across communities, whether by income, race, or geography?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we're seeing lots of interesting demographic changes, right? Where increasingly, women are either choosing not to have children or delaying the age at first birth until much later in life, until they feel established enough in their careers. I know for academics, right? Even many mentors that I had who were women and had children counseled me not to have children until I was tenured. It meant waiting another 6 years from when I had my first child. So with regard to demographics, I think we're also seeing Gen X right now is also, and I think this will be the case for millennials as well, right? We're seeing these elements of what's called the sandwich generation, where people in their 30s and 40s are sandwiched between caregiving for their elderly parents and caregiving for their younger children. And so that's a very difficult situation to be in. And without additional social supports, it's going to be untenable for many. I think for later generations, we're also seeing, right, because the cost of housing now is so out of control, a lot of households won't have that as a fallback option, right? For Gen X and boomers, right? Many were still able to buy homes. And so there's still that large asset that can help hold families together. For lower income folks, and again, for these younger generations who aren't going to be able to afford homes, that creates just a tremendous amount of precarity for them. So I think that's something that we really need to be paying attention to, is how to make sure that housing is accessible and affordable for everyone.
I appreciate your insight on that. If you can describe a scene from your vision of the future for Ohio's youngest children and their caregivers, what would that be?
I really love this program that's been developed in Bogota. They're called care blocks. And so these are effectively community centers placed strategically throughout communities where folks can go, where childcare is available, elder care is available, but also a lot of public services, legal aid, enrichment classes, skill development classes. And so it's a space where caregivers can bring kids and elderly parents to socialize with others, right? Get that connection that's very much needed, but also take care of some of the administrative tasks in their lives, run some of their errands, and also get some time to themselves, right? To sort of rest and recharge and to meet others in their community, right? And help establish those social networks that I think we miss a lot now that we have so many online networks. We don't have as many people in person that we can rely on, which is so important when you're a caregiver.
Thank you so much for painting that rich picture, Dr. Chen. And thank you so much for joining me this afternoon for such a timely episode for May. Mother's Day is around the corner, so I truly appreciate your expertise and your time. Please remember, if you care for or love a young child in Ohio, you are an expert and your voice matters. Amplify your voice by sharing your own story, supporting others and sharing their stories, and advocate for changes that will support families and young children in your communities. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Amplified Podcast Reloaded on the Groundwork Ohio YouTube channel.